Hey, Karen.
Yes.
I didn't realize we were doing this in the chambers. Is anyone coming to the chambers?
No, that's just in case there are any.
In progress.
All right, I'm going to check my email again for the chair notes. Give me a second. Yeah, I still don't have those somehow. They must be going to a junk folder. What was the title of the email?
Chair notes. Malia and myself both sent you another email,
Malia.
so hopefully you'll get them.
Oh, got it. Thank you. Okay, thanks. Here we go. See if this will load. There we go. Okay, thank you for your patience. We're going to call the meeting to order. Right now it is 12:05 on Thursday, March 10th, 2022. This is a meeting of the Municipal Council, and it's being held in a hybrid fashion. That is, members of the public can continue to view council meetings on YouTube and Facebook, or they may attend in person in the council chamber at Provo City Center. I remind participants to mute your microphones when not speaking to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations to be picked up, recorded, and broadcast for everybody to hear. We'll start with a roll call of participating members of the Provo City Council, and then we'll ask the attendees from Orem to introduce themselves, just the elected officials. So let's do a roll call of the Provo City Councilors who are available. Now, it looks like Councilor Whipple is here, Councilor McKay is here, Councilor Fillmore, Councilor Shipley, and I understand that Chair Hoban is going to be a little bit late and that Councilor Handley could not participate. Am I missing anyone? Is the mayor in attendance? I can't see her.
She is not. She is out of the office today.
Okay, excellent. Can we ask Mayor David Young to introduce himself and then identify all the councilors from Orem?
Yes, I'm glad to be here. My name is Dave Young and I'm the new mayor.
Excellent. And then it looks like
I'm Debbie LeRae and I'm on Orem City Council. I can introduce myself.
Thank you.
And I'm Lene Millett right here. I'm new on the Orem City Council as of this past election. So happy to meet with you all.
And
Excellent.
we just had Terry Peterson join us. He's probably caught in the twilight zone of shifting to being a panelist. There you are.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Terry
Excellent.
Peterson.
Thank you, Councilor Peterson. So we have 3 councilors from Orem and the mayor. Welcome. We're excited to meet you. We're excited to meet you in person, hopefully at the league conference in April. We're going to start with an opening prayer, and that will be given by Councilor McKay.
Dear Heavenly Father, we are grateful to be gathered here today as neighboring cities with shared interests. And we pray that we can be compassionate in our thought processes and think long-term in regards to our citizens. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Man.
Thank you for that. Let's see here. Although this is a public meeting, only the presenters and those invited by the council may speak or ask questions unless otherwise invited by the chair. Please wait to speak until called on by the council chair or the person chairing this meeting, which is myself today. So we have scheduled this meeting for an hour, and we have a few items of business that were presented by various council members. The first item of business is a discussion regarding Utah Lake. And it turns out my name is next to that one. So I'm just curious to learn from Orem, the Orem councilors. I know you don't speak as a body right now, but curious about your perspectives on Utah Lake. Just this past, what was it, in January, the Provo City Council with the mayor supported and passed a joint resolution to encourage the Utah State Legislature to support the ecological integrity of Utah Lake, the water quality, the water rights, and the economic value that it brings to the whole valley, right? Whether your city touches the lake or not. So we just wanted to create a short discussion around that to see if Orem has similar interests, and if anything, what can we do to work together on behalf of Utah Lake?
Yeah, we were actually, am I muted?
No, go ahead.
Okay. We were actually really involved in that whole conversation with Utah Lake. We found our citizens had a lot of interest in that. Primarily, there was a lot of concern about the original proposal on the Islands project. That seemed to get the most people up in arms and concerned, justifiably. And so we were completely against that project. And that's kind of what got us involved. And then when that looked like that wasn't going to happen, then you moved over to the Utah Lake Authority. And we were kind of mixed on the Utah Lake Authority. We like some elements of it as far as what they're trying to accomplish, what they're trying to do. And then we had concerns on other elements like creating a new taxing entity and exactly what that means. And so we kind of watched that go through the legislature, and we were really active in working with legislators and trying to keep that, essentially our focus, I think, is very much like yours, and that we're very much about, we want Utah Lake to maintain all of its ecological and natural, benefits to the area. But we're very concerned about development out there and what that looks like. So anyway, that's kind of, anybody else?
Yeah, I can add to that. Our Natural Resource Committee, which was a committee of our city, was really concerned about the similar things to what Provo was. One thing we lobbied hard, and we worked a lot with Mayor Fulmer from Vineyard, and of getting representation on Utah County. I don't know if the original bill had a lot of Salt Lake County. We didn't feel like that was reasonable. So we worked, Steve Earle, who's one of our attorneys, worked, and like Mayor said, we lobbied to make sure that had strong Utah representation. We were concerned about, I think they called it the toilet tax. I think it was a $2 per month taxing entity. I know that wasn't in the final bill. So those two areas, besides what the mayor talked about, the development, we were concerned about. We feel like what came through at the end was a positive. It had Utah County representation, and I think they took the toilet taxability out of that. So we did, even though we didn't pass a formal resolution, we were similar in supporting what Provo is, and we worked really behind the scenes to make that a better bill.
Okay, specifically the Utah Lake Authority. Okay, was there another hand up? Let's see, Councilor Millet.
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of add to what Debbie said. Our city attorney, Steve Earle, was very instrumental in doing a lot of research and reaching out to our legislators for that. So I just would like to make sure he gets that credit that he did. I think that cooperation with our legislators is a lot of what got the voices heard, and I appreciate that from him.
Great.
And just to add to that, I do think as far as our working with Provo, I think our interests really are aligned on that project. And so going forward in the future, depending on how this lake authority evolves, I look forward to working with Provo and making sure that we're pretty united on what that looks like.
Okay. As I referenced earlier, the Provo City Council passed a resolution, and it didn't mention at all the Utah Lake Authority. It did promote environmental stewardship. It did say that we were opposed to islands. It said that we also support the economic values of the lake, as well as water rights being protected. The Provo City Council never took a position on the Utah Lake Authority. And I've tracked some of the Utah Lake bills for the last few years. I think there's some pros and some cons to the Utah Lake Authority, but my recommendation for both cities is to watch the authority very, very closely in the legislature. These authorities that the state has created change over time, sometimes very rapidly. For example, Salt Lake City used to have a board seat with the Inland Port Authority, and as of this legislative session, they do not have a seat on the board of the Inland Port Authority. So let's all keep our eyes on that and look out for each other there. Any other comments on Utah Lake?
Shannon, if I might speak up. In speaking with some of the state representatives about the scientific debate, it seemed to me that our citizens would welcome a full-on debate between scientists on both sides of the discussion. The developers lined up some scientists of their own, which were apparently fairly persuasive with some of the legislators. And I suggested to those legislators that we ought to have them debate those who are opposed to the islands and the dredging and all that. And they indicated that they thought that would be a good idea and that they would help us line up such a debate. I'm just wondering if this Orem City would like to co-sponsor that debate, since we both have a shared stake in the outcome.
Yes, I mean, I'd have to clear with the city council, but I think in general, based on the interest we had going into this, that'd be something we'd be very interested in.
I wonder, I won't speak for Orem or Provo, but I wonder if that would be better managed by like a nonprofit group. Might be Utah Valley Earth Forum. They've had different symposiums or forums on Utah Lake and Conserve Utah Valley as well. Maybe they're better arbiters of that conversation.
Well, I don't know. I think both cities have quite a stake in this, Shannon, and I think if you put it in a nonprofit, they're going to be assumed to be biased in one direction or another. I think we can put together a very good non-biased discussion or debate. The key is getting the right people on both sides to speak up publicly.
Yeah, that's true. Transparency and more information will only bring better results. Thank you, Councilor Fillmore. All right, I'm looking at the chair notes. So on my chair notes, it says that item 2 is RDA business, but maybe this is just a typo. And then it says a discussion on Provo's form of government presented by Councilor Ellsworth and Wayne Parker, Provo City Chief Administrator. To be honest, I'm not sure where this agenda item originated. Is there someone from Orem or Provo who wanted this on the agenda who can better speak to this, or maybe Wayne has some context?
My understanding was it was requested by Orem City. So I think, my sense here is that we'd just love to hear your questions, and sound like you kind of wanted to better understand how our mayor council form works, and we're happy to answer any of the questions you might have. So,
Thanks, Wayne.
That was as far as just to get some ideas on, as far as describing exactly how your form of government works, how common it is in the state, how long you've had this form of government, what you think the strengths are, and what you think the weaknesses are, and if there's anything you could do to improve your form of government, what would it be? So those would be my questions to that point.
Maybe we can have Mr. Parker address some of those questions. He has a wealth of history and institutional knowledge in Provo, and then there might be a couple of councilors in Provo who can speak to pros and cons. I'll just start by saying every form of government of the I don't know, what are there, 4 or 5 forms of municipal government has its pros and cons. But take it away, Mr. Parker.
well, thank you, Councilor. Let me answer just a couple of the generic questions. First, the form of government is essentially called the mayor council form. It is sometimes referred to as the strong mayor form. And just in a nutshell, the form in Provo operates very similarly to the state or federal model, where the mayor is the chief executive officer of the city, is not a member of the council, and is essentially the operations director of city government. Plays the same role as the governor in the state system. The city council is a legislative body. The council elects its own chair each year, and again, from our perspective, we have 2 at-large seats in the city, and then 5 district seats in the city, and those are again elected just every on a 2-year rotating cycle. Our form of government initiated back in the late 80s, I think, is probably, I have to go back and double check that. It was probably the early 80s, more like 81, 82. But in any event, the There was a citizens committee largely led by the business community that evaluated forms of government options. Provo operated under the commission form at the time, very similar to what the county currently operates under, where each commissioner had their own portfolio, and in some ways, there's even an argument that it ran like 3 different cities during the commission era. I think the Provo Chamber of Commerce kind of led the way. There's might be some names you would recognize: Carl Snow, former professor at BYU, and Gleason Brennan, who owns or owned at the time the brick oven pizza known as Heaps back in the day. Those 2 chaired the committee, went through a lengthy process of trying to figure out what form of government would work best for Provo, because they knew the commission form was not working well. They made the decision to put on the ballot a proposal for a council mayor form with a required chief administrative officer. So it was attempting to bridge, and I've talked to Carl and Glee and Jim Ferguson and others about this, but the general sense was that it blended the good things with the mayor council form with a requirement of not a city manager, but someone who came with that professional background and would serve at the pleasure of the mayor, and in many ways kind of help bridge that gap and provide some continuity between city administrations. So we've been in that forum for quite a while now, 40 years or thereabouts. In terms of other cities, I'm trying to remember, I think there are 9 if I remember right. So I think we're the largest with this form of government. Well, I guess Salt Lake does, but they don't have a required chief administrative officer. So it's a little bit different from ours, but under the kind of general form we're in. Sandy is the next largest city. Let's see.
West Jordan.
Murray has West Jordan does now, right? Just changed recently. So West Jordan, Logan, Ogden. So those are the ones that come to mind off the top of my head. But so it's not super common in the state, but it's there are 6 to 10 cities that utilize that form. So again, and and again, I don't want to speak for pros and cons on I'd love to hear the elected officials' view of the pros and cons, but so the Orem form of government, which is the council manager form, operates. We talked about Provo's operating a little bit more like the state government, and Mayor Young and I have had this discussion. In some ways, it operates a lot more like a school district, where you have an elected board to whom the superintendent reports, and the board hires a superintendent based on professional expertise and experience and so on. And then the superintendent makes essentially all the executive decisions associated with the school district. So in some ways, it's kind of analogous. I think it's helpful to maybe think about it that way, trying to draw a distinction between the 2 forms of government. So did I hit your questions other than the pros and cons?
Yes. As far as my questions, that was great, outlining that.
I do have a question about your mayor. Does she have veto power over any resolution that legislatively that gets passed, or is she just implementation of what the council says?
Okay, so that you've asked a good question. There are 2 parts to the answer. So in terms of a resolution, under the traditional form of expressing the intent of the municipal council, the mayor does not veto resolutions unless it is a joint resolution on the part of the mayor and the council together. And then she actually could do that. But the mayor can veto any city ordinance. And so if the council adopts an ordinance, the mayor can veto. And again, it takes, in our form of government, it takes 5 of the 7 members of the council to override the veto. So it varies a little bit depending on what action the council takes.
So I'll just add to that. I've worked with cities all over the state as a professional, and I've served here in Provo. the comparison I always make, and Wayne already made this, is it's similar. I compare it to the legislature and the governor. The governor is elected. He works full time to execute and administer programs and the legislative laws that the legislature passed. And the legislature is part-time, and they pass laws and they pass the budget. And they're separate branches of government. And I tell people that we have basically separate branches of government. And the mayor in Provo does not chair council meetings. In most cities, the mayor participates actively in council meetings and often chairs those meetings and works with the staff to set agendas. And sometimes they vote and sometimes they don't vote, depending on the form of government, but they're very active as a kind of a peer colleague to councilors and council meetings. And our form of government is separate, where, like the legislature, we manage the legislative meetings, the council meetings. And in Provo, the council has 5 staffers that serve just the council. And then, like at the state level, where there's hundreds of people working underneath the governor, in Provo City, there's hundreds of people working under the mayor with her directors, reporting to her directors and through those different departments. And so those staffers don't report to us. And with our form of government and with the processes we've set up, we move legislation and requests and policy analysis through our staff to the mayor's staff. So it takes a lot of collaboration. And trying to think, yeah, our mayor is full time, which is fairly uncommon for elected officials in Utah. And maybe one of the only, well, like I said, I think there's pros and cons for every form of government. One of the cons I'll highlight is it makes it harder to coordinate and to push and pull information between the council and the mayor and administration. So sometimes there's just little pieces of information or updates that fall through the cracks, or sometimes folks might go to the mayor and say, hey, this is something we'd like to do. And the council, maybe it's not a serious proposal, maybe it is, but that information doesn't make it to the council, or it could be vice versa. And sometimes there's just a misunderstanding among citizens, right? They say, well, the city did this. And the mayor gets blamed. She gets angry emails. Well, it wasn't just the city, it was the city council. And the mayor didn't have control over that. Or the council gets blamed for something the mayor did. So it's a little bit more confusing, I think, for citizens because it is more separate. But I'd be interested to hear the other councilors' opinions. What did I miss or misrepresent?
Shannon, before you go on, this is Debbie. What are your 5 staffers? Like, is one an attorney? Is one? Tell me what. And
Yeah.
are they? Tell me what how they who
They're
they are.
I'm not going to tell you their names because you might try and poach them to Orem City, and we won't have that, Debbie.
Just their job title.
No, I'm kidding. We have a council executive director. So Cliff Strachan was our council executive director, and he left just barely and took a position in Sandy, which has the same form of government. But he's going to work for the Sandy mayor, which is a tremendous asset because then he'll be able to understand where the council's coming from in the same form of government. There's 2 policy analysts, and they're terrific, and they support the council's committees and subcommittees. So when we're looking at water conservation or updating our ADU bill, those council policy analysts take on a big workload with those committees when we have these internal initiatives. And we consistently have, internal initiatives that we're working through. And then we have Karen's job title is like communications and neighborhood management. Tell me what the correct title is, Karen.
I am the community relations coordinator. It combines the neighborhoods and communications.
There you go. So Karen herds a lot of cats and manages a lot of external communications, plenty of internal communications, works with the mayor's PIO and comms team. And then we have an administrative or executive assistant who also herds many cats and helps us keep our agendas together, acts almost not an official recorder, but makes sure that we follow all of those processes per state law. So those are the 5 that we have.
Any other thoughts as far as pros and cons to your form of government? I mean, if you could wave a magic wand and say, what could you do to make it optimal? Is there anything you would change?
Mr. Shipley, take it away.
Thanks, Shannon. No, I think Shannon did a good job. I was going to say, I think having a full-time mayor is great. I think there's some advantages of having someone that is just fully dedicated to, if Mayor Kafusi is fully dedicated on a full-time basis, even more than full-time, I'd say, to trying to create messaging for our city, to lead our city. And I appreciate that. I will say, to Shannon's point about, sometimes the coordination is difficult. It just, I don't know that that's necessarily a con. I just think that there are challenges when you have a legislative arm and an executive arm, sometimes, being on the same page. And sometimes you don't need to be on the same page. It just presents its own set of challenges to work in coordination. And I think we've gotten that right over the last few years, but I know that, there have been times historically where that's been more of a challenge and has created some dysfunction within city government.
Yeah.
I have one more
I'll
question. What is the cost for these extra 5 staffers? I mean, are these people getting paid 80, 90,000 plus benefits, or, I mean, do you know off the top of your head? Maybe Wayne knows what their costs are.
Debbie, maybe what we can do is break out the budget for the council office and email that to you later. Would that be all right?
That'd be great. Thank you.
That'll be more accurate than me spitball here. Yeah, it is terrific that we have a full-time mayor. Most of the council works full-time. And so we'd like to go to ribbon cuttings at J-Dogs and other things like that, we can't make it, or we'd like to, visit Washington, D.C. and see our congressional delegation there and advocate for Provo. We have full-time jobs, and so it's just not realistic a lot of times. Every once in a while, there might be something where the mayor and the council disagree, and the mayor and the administration have the time and capacity to advance their position, where the council doesn't take up a position or doesn't take up time to advance that maybe competing position. So that's something that could happen.
So when you say you don't have time, so are you part-time counselor and you have a full-time job doing something else? Or
yeah, absolutely. 6 of the 7 counselors, to my knowledge, have full-time jobs. Okay. So none of us are retired. And we all work 40 or 50 plus hours at law firms or at BYU, or I work at a mining company. And so we do this evenings and weekends and lunch breaks. And that's one of the advantages of having a full-time mayor, is they can dedicate their whole day and many of their evenings to this.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, yeah.
Can I ask, what would you say? Oh, I'm sorry. What would you say your executive director does then? Does he coordinate between the mayor's office and the city council, or what is that position?
Yeah, so we're hiring a new executive director. The executive director coordinates between the administration, which is, again, hundreds of people, multiple directors, the mayor, the mayor's office, the mayor's immediate direct staff, and coordinates with their staff, with the council staff, right? And makes assignments to the council staff. So if we did have a sign committee that was evaluating and updating ordinances on LED lights, LED signs, where they could be, where they couldn't be. So that executive director assigns a policy analyst to those different committees and those different subcommittees. They represent the council to the administration. They coordinate lots of information. They organize meetings. All the council meetings are organized through that executive director. I'm underselling them, and I just I wrote their job description. There's just so many things that they do: program management, policy evaluation, managing the 4 other employees who work in the council office, working directly with directors. There's a broad scope of what they do.
So I'm curious, as far as, it sounds to me like the executive director is more of a facilitator and manager of the entire situation. I'm not quite clear on what the policy analysts are doing.
Okay. And someone else, I'll let them chime in. We have 2 policy analysts, and we have multiple council committees. So we have a water conservation committee. That's a priority of the council. And so we're updating ordinances and evaluating our practices on water conservation. We have a housing committee. We had a sign committee. We have a economic development committee. We have the RDA board. We have, what else am I forgetting? A public art committee. And I don't have the time or the expertise to update those ordinances and come up with best practices for ADUs, for water conservation, for sign lights. And that's the staff's job. That's the policy analyst's job, is to look for best practices, evaluate what's on the books, tell us what Orem's doing, what Springville's doing, and how can we update our ordinances to make that better. There's a lot of land use items, obviously, that come to us, and most of those go through the mayor's staff, but occasionally they might be evaluated by our staff. The whole budget process is often managed with those policy analysts. Bill, did you have your hand up?
I did. I wasn't going to comment on the latter item on the executive director as much as the pros and cons. I just wanted to chime in on that just a little bit. I will say that I think I can speak for our entire council. We have really loved working with Cliff Strachan. He is almost a model executive director for the council. He does so many things. He makes our job so much easier. He helps us get information. He's a sounding board. He's also an arbitrator at times. I mean, very, very high on that position if you get the right person. I wanted to go back just to the pros and cons on the strong mayor system. I'm hazarding a guess that all current members of the Provo City Council are very much in favor of this system, that we feel it works well. And for me, I like it primarily because it follows the constitutional model, the separation of powers, the checks and balances that has worked well for us. What I have found is that over the years that I've been on the council, we tend to come to a consensus. It depends on people's goodwill, of course, but the back and forth between the legislative body and the executive body tends to generate better decisions in the end, and a more unified approach to what we're trying to do in terms of our priorities and how we implement them. I will say this: perhaps the largest con about the constitutional model is that it's not always terribly efficient. I've often thought, and I can see Shannon shaking her head, that there have been times when I wish that maybe we'd had a county commission form where all I had to do was get one more vote and I would prevail, right? But that doesn't necessarily generate the best outcomes. I think that we also feel as a council that we're quite comfortable with a full-time mayor. I think a city reaches a certain size, and just the size, the complexity of a city like Provo or Orem, for that matter, almost mandates a full-time mayor. Just there's so much that needs to be done and done well. It's hard to do it on a part-time basis. Maybe you guys are better at that than we would be, but I'm very comfortable with the setup we have here in Provo. And frankly,
Shannon?
I would add, if I might, that for those same reasons that I favor the strong mayor city council approach, same reasons I'm in favor of that for Utah County. I felt poorly that the citizens committee that recommended this county mayor, county council structure, that effort was defeated in the end. I think as Utah County continues to grow and become more complex and becomes ever more a juggernaut for the state's economy and everything else. We need that more diverse representation and the checks and balances that come from this kind of a system. Sorry if I cut you off, Dave.
Shannon, this is Terry Peterson. May I ask you a question? Are you there?
Yes.
Okay, so just trying to figure out how this works on a practical basis. For example, if I am the director of the rec center in Provo, and
Mm-hmm.
I need a new swimming pool,
Mm-hmm.
who would I? What's my process? I need a new pool. What group or organization do I turn to say, here's my issue?
Yeah. I'll do my best to answer your question. Again, I'm not full-time, nor do I manage the rec center or the finance department. The finance department and the rec department are under the mayor. But if you manage the rec center and you need a new pool, that should be on your capital improvements list, right? Your capital improvements plan. And you know that you need that pool and you're planning for it. And you would take that to the director. Wayne, help me out. You'd take it to the director of the Parks Department, and it's an incredible Parks Department, by the way. And then they would help kind of prioritize that and sort that in their capital improvements list. And then when it comes to budget season, which is like basically February to July in Provo, then the every department director comes to the council and tells us, hey, this is what we've been doing the last year, and this is what we're hoping to do the next year. This is where we're spending our money. We had more expenses or fewer expenses or higher revenues or lower revenues. Give us an overview. And we have that conversation with every department at least twice. And the administration does their best to prioritize among the departments the needs. And then we can reallocate or manage the budget, negotiate a budget basically that supports the immediate needs and the planned needs. And then the council passes that budget. What did I miss, Wayne?
I think you hit it, Shannon. One of the things that we've tried really hard to do in Provo is to understand what the council's priorities are very early in the process. Part of that comes out of these department presentations that Shannon's talking about. Part of it comes from just, talking to their neighbors and friends and figuring out what the city's priorities should be. And then those are typically shared with the mayor about this time of year, generally around the 1st of April or so. And then the mayor, in the preparation of the final, her recommended budget to the council, tries to highlight all the ways in which she tried to meet those needs or felt there were higher priorities. And so ideally, we bring a budget to the council that we think they're very likely to adopt. Even though it's the mayor's responsibility to prepare her recommended budget, it's not very helpful if that recommended budget gets, that you play the game the legislature does, which is, thank you very much, Governor Cox, pat on the head, and now we'll go create our own. It's this collaborative process very, very early in the game, I think works extremely well. So and then again, the budget's presented like in every city the first week in May. The administration brings the budget proposal to the council, and then during May and June, they go through a process. Occasionally have a retreat, or they may invite directors back to talk about some of the key priorities the mayor's included. And then, by late June, when the statutory requirement is, the council then adopts a final budget. So I think that's the only thing I would add to Shannon's description.
Thank you.
Right. So last year, the council prioritized, there was a hiring freeze and there was, I think, a pay increase freeze because we were nervous about the impacts of COVID-19. And so last year we said that wasn't the case. We did all right. So let's unfreeze that and make sure that we're paying our employees appropriately. That was a budget priority of the council. And then another budget priority was code enforcement. And was another budget priority parking? I think so. The council comes to a consensus on 3 or 4 or 5 priorities, sends that to the mayor's office, and they move things around so that those priorities are appropriately funded. But the swimming pool, honestly, I can't think of many situations where that would really come to the council because it's planned for at multiple levels within the administration.
So I'm not asking that because of we have an issue of a pool, but just hypothetically how that works. So if again, so now if there's a situation that wasn't planned in the budget that, oh, we didn't anticipate that, does that go to Michelle and then Michelle brings it to the council? Or what would that process be?
Well, if there was some unexpected expense or some unique opportunity, it always has to come to the council. I imagine it gets vetted through the administration before Wayne's directors would allow that to move to a council agenda. But it has to be approved by the council because the council is the land use authority. The council has all the purse strings and manages that budget or passes the budget and approves all expenditures at a high level and passes all laws. What did I miss, Wayne?
I think you got it. That's the key difference. Yep.
Yeah. Hey, let's move on just because we have about 14 minutes left and I'm sensitive to people's work schedules. We have a discussion on Provo School District on the agenda, a discussion on effective or successful affordable housing initiatives. And then there was another item from Councilor McKay, maybe about Lakeview Parkway. If we only get to pick one more thing to talk about, would you rather talk about affordable housing or Provo School District or Lakeview Parkway?
We'd really like your input on the school district because that's something that's right in front of us right now.
All right, I think Councilor Hoban was going to talk about this one.
Yeah, hey
Just
everybody.
Watch the clock, everybody.
Sorry I joined a little late. Appreciate the opportunity to participate with you all. I guess we wanted to start with what questions did you have around the school board and our relationship with them and such? What were you thinking?
Yeah, we were just looking at, how long you've had your school district and essentially what you feel are the strengths of having your school district, as a small, I mean, it's not that small, but it's smaller than, the one that we're in. But what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, pluses, minuses, just generally getting an idea of how well having your own Provost school districts works for you.
So as far as timeline, I think we might have to turn to somebody who's more senior than me who would be able to answer that. I don't know off the top of my head how long we've had a school district that's coterminous, the boundaries are coterminous with the city. I can speak, I think, a little bit to this on behalf of my council members, that some of the potential advantages are being able to coordinate and prioritize and plan together on certain things. So for example, not putting two bonds on the ballot in the same year or same election or something like that. There's maybe a little bit of some advantages there. There might be some potential downside of, I think it can be confusing sometimes to citizens to know who's doing what. So for example, I'll use the bond example again. We would do a bond 1 year and then the school board would follow with the bond and they're saying, hey, the city of Provo is doing, bonds back to back to back. Right. And so I think that's, there can be some confusion there as far as people don't really know how to separate the two entities sometimes. The other piece is, obviously when we build a new school, it's all on our people. It's all on the people of Provo. There's no sharing those costs, with other cities, adjacent cities or cities that are part of the school district or share the school district. So, I don't know. I think as far as pluses and minuses, I mean, it could go either way. You just have to determine based on your current situation, if the current situation is meeting your needs, if the current structure is meeting your needs. So I think what we would need to, if we wanted to go a little deeper into this, maybe to understand, what are some of the challenges you're seeing, and then we could maybe speak to whether or not, having the structure we have might help in those areas. So I'm not trying to not be a lot of help here, but I think at a high level, that's, maybe how we would look at it.
Shannon, if I could speak up, it might be helpful to clarify something. As a city council, we have absolutely no control over the school board. It's a totally independent body, separately elected, separate budget. What we do have is a strong collaborative relationship. That is, they seek our input, or we offer it voluntarily. But we collaborate on bonds. We collaborate on infrastructure needs. That's probably the biggest thing. Is as we try to anticipate new schools, we've got to, as the city, we're responsible for the infrastructure, so that's got to be coordinated. We've had a good working relationship with them, but we don't direct them, and so I think the biggest pro that we feel, just speaking as a citizen, not a city council member, is it's nice to have local control over our local schools. It's that simple. But again, the input for the city council is more collaborative than authoritative.
Yeah. One recommendation I'll give you on that is to reach out to Melanie Hall, who is the president of the Provo City School District Board. As was alluded to, it is confusing because it's called the Provo City School District, but it's not a municipal function. And so President Hall is the person who is the board president over there. And then another good resource on the Provo City School Board is McKay Jensen. He's a professional in the education realm and just has a wealth of experience at multiple levels of education and management and administration. So if you just Google Provo City School District, you can find their information.
So, and there were a few comments posted. It looks like the school district was formed in 1898.
Wow.
And then Isaac Paxman said Provo residents have more control over the Provo City School District than Orem or any other member city. Residents have more control than residents have over the Alpine School District. So I can't speak to that, but just sharing his comment.
All from total 3.
All right. If it's all right, we'll move on for a 8-minute discussion on housing, on affordable housing. In my notes, it says, with the housing shortage that Utah County is suffering from right now, what has Provo or Orem done to address it? And what can Provo and Orem do collectively to address the problem? I think housing is on everyone's mind. These questions come to us all the time as the land use authority, and definitely they come to Orem consistently as well. I believe that Provo has about 60% of the valley's affordable housing, and we hope that there's a high quality of life with affordable housing and the density that's created in our city. It makes sense to have a denser urban center, especially close to transit. It's just good planning practices and good infrastructure practices. But I think I'll speak for the council here. I think we're really open to being good partners to Orem and appropriately dispersing affordable housing throughout the county, and making sure that there's a quality of life that can be maintained throughout the valley. What other comments or questions could be approached with this topic?
I was curious as far as the affordable housing question. I mean, a lot of times apartments are deemed affordable housing, but our experience in Orem is that a lot of the apartments are not affordable housing. A lot of the apartments, I mean, $1,400 for a single, $1,700 for a double, $2,100 for a triple, are equal to mortgage rates. And so the problem is not that there's not enough apartments. The problem is that there's not just actually housing that people can afford and move into a home, an ownership situation. So I don't know that there's any solid answers to that, because we're kind of in a free market and market prices have pushed up incredibly in the last year and a half. But so I guess I was just more curious if you've got any initiatives focused specifically on the affordable piece as opposed to the density piece.
I'll just say Provo hasn't figured it out. If somebody has figured it out, call us. Let us know what your secret is. And you're right. It's not necessarily that density equates to affordability. There is a lack of supply and an excess of demand, and everybody on the West Edge front is navigating that. Debbie, did you have a comment?
I do. I know some cities like Park City are requiring new projects to have a certain percentage, let's say 10%, 50%, where it does have to have a low income rent rate based on, I think they're thinking of their employees that work at the ski resorts. Have that something you've considered, certain percentage of a project that would have to be that, or is that still something you're waiting to see?
I'll answer this one, and if someone from the housing committee wants to comment, by all means. That's not something that we've considered. Our city is getting closer to being built out. And so we're just seeing a lot more infill projects. And there's a pretty classic development model of a developer buying 20 acres or 40 acres and building exactly the same product across the board. And so integrating different housing types or different affordabilities within the same project has been hard for us. Maybe that's because of our code and the constraints there. Or maybe there's just not the political will. Sometimes we have this concern or debate amongst ourselves about how much is enough, right? Is Provo taking too much? Do we have a lot of student housing? We have a lot of student rentals. We have a lot of general rentals. We have a lot of density. We have a lot of affordable housing, and what's sustainable for our city long term? Where can we handle this? What's the capacity of our infrastructure? Just like Orem, I can't say that we haven't figured out. We're still navigating that, but no, we haven't created any kind of inclusionary zoning ordinance or practice yet.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Shannon, would it be fair to say, Shannon, that we're not terribly focused on proliferating more apartment complexes, that our focus really is on middle housing? How can we get some mid-range housing options for people, whether we're talking about affordable single home or condos or townhomes or duplexes or whatever? But I think that's our primary focus, and the question is how to balance that with the available land we have against the preferences of our citizens.
Yeah, I wish that was one of our focuses, was capturing more missing middle housing. I mean, I can't think of, in the 6 years I've been on council and planning commission, I can't think of when we've approved a duplex project or when one has been proposed. And so, sure, as Bill alluded to, we have a lot of apartments and we have a lot of single family homes. And if we were, I don't know, if we were doing something differently, maybe we could capture more mid-range housing types. But we're navigating it just the same as Orem is. We don't have it figured out. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I was just curious if you had any federal grant programs, neighborhood revitalization programs, because one of the pieces to me seems that in Orem anyway is we've got a lot of older neighborhoods, and it seems like in a lot of those older neighborhoods, if there was some federal grant money or something, that you could come in and revitalize those, but much the same way that a home flipper does when a home flipper goes in. Because I have seen several areas where they're pretty run down, they're pretty shot, and then slowly they start getting bought up by home flippers and they're turned over. And at that point, they're still affordable. I mean, they're, so that's kind of an internal thing that's going on. I've seen that a lot in downtown Salt Lake too. Downtown Salt Lake's kind of building out from the middle and revitalizing from the center out in all those older areas. So anyway, I'm just curious.
I think one of the things that you're talking about is something that we haven't addressed well in Provo, in my experiences, and that's the quality of the housing stock. And sometimes we come at that from the angle of code enforcement, but we don't really have a good grip on the quality of our housing stock, and it's extra hard, I think, in a college town, as we're both college towns. There's a hand up from Bill Pepperoni, who is the director of Development Services.
Yes,
Provo?
we do have three apartment buildings in the city that were built as low income tax credit buildings. So at least 80% of the units in those buildings are locked up for low income, people who qualify as low income. We have a fourth one that's under construction right now. I think the fact that we had the zoning in place for higher density like that made it easier for those developers to do the projects that took some of the guesswork out of the entitlement process. Why Provo has gotten those and Orem hasn't gotten any, I don't know. But we do have light tech projects in Provo.
Yeah.
Are those federal funded tax credits?
Wayne, are those through the federal or state?
Either one.
They are federal, but there are also state benefits as well. So yeah, so essentially it lets you do it at a much reduced income tax rate for the owners based on their commitments to low and moderate income housing.
So you apply for those? Do the developers apply for those, or you do? Or you apply for those?
They're applied for typically through the Utah Housing Corporation. That's the general gatekeeper in Utah, and they administer both federal funds as well as essentially industrial revenue bonds. Or they're housing bonds, but the Private Activity Bond Board at the state level and the Utah Housing Corporation kind of negotiate over those and issue a number of them across the state every year. Again, we've been recipients, not we, the city, but developers in our city have been the recipient of those benefits and in exchange for much more affordable housing.
Okay. Yeah, that's something I don't know that we've looked at, but that would be something we should look at.
Can you give us the names of those projects so I could check them out sometime?
Yeah, so I don't know, Bill, do you have those right on the top of your head?
Yes, Startup Crossing, 6 South, 2nd West, Cowboy Partners, what is it called? Liberty Center on Center Street and 3rd West.
Bill, you could just email those, right? And we can pass them to the Orem.
That would be great. Thank you. That'd be great.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for taking the time to coordinate and collaborate and discuss some of our mutual issues. There was a point on the chair notes that said Councilor McKay wanted to bring up Lakeview Parkways. Is that something we can take to another meeting, Councilor McKay? Maybe she's not here. All right, well, let's keep that for another meeting. And we'll end it here, but it's fun to see new faces in Orem, and we have a couple new faces in Provo. I hope that we can all go to the League Conference in St. George and get to know each other better. That is a tremendous resource to learn about good policy and municipal management, and really just to make friends. Our phone numbers are online, our emails are online. I'd love to answer your calls, answer your questions. So would my colleagues. So don't hesitate to reach out. We're in this together. So thank you everyone for joining us. If that's the last of it, we will just adjourn this joint meeting of the Provo City Council and the Orem City Council. Thank you.
Thank you.